Go. All right, welcome to workplace training. We've called it workplace ministry training. We're actually thinking about changing the name of it, but it's about what it means to be a Christian in the workplace. Your flight today will take you on a very interesting journey. All right? I thought I would use some airline terms. You are not here by chance. If you think somehow maybe I got here just by chance, we believe everyone who's here is here because God wanted you here, okay? You will not benefit by chance, but by choice. So have an open heart. You might hear things that are very new or different. I just ask that you be open to the Lord about the things He wants to teach you, all right? And then lastly, what you learn will be passed on by design. I tell you, I love to hear the stories. People will write back and said, Paul, you know, we went through this training at FCAP, and as soon as I left, God brought me people. You know, He brought people along. So I thought, well, praise the Lord. So that's what God wants to do. I think we've been introduced. My name is Paul Curtas. I've served as General Director of the Fellowship of Christian Airline Personnel, and this is my wife, Claudette. All right. FCAP has been operating in the airline industry for 44 years. This is our staff, with the exception of maybe one or two, and there's some new ones coming on. And this is our FCAP International Office. The ministry was started, it's out in the country. Everyone thinks when they come to a training they're going to go right by the airport and hear all the airport noise. But they go out in this wilderness, you know, and they think, oh, incredible. So this is the office there. The ministry was started 44 years ago by three pilots, a Delta pilot, a Northwest pilot, and a United pilot, who had a burden for to be light in the airline industry. And they just thought they would reach the pilots. Well, a year or two later, a flight attendant came along, and she said, hey, I want the flight attendants to come along. And then a year or so later, then the ground staff came along, mechanics and airport staff, and then the ministry started that way, and it grew. And just the nature of the airline industry, news travels very easily among airlines people because they travel. So the ministry traveled, and we're in about 45 different areas of the world now. So and I've really been blessed to be able to really travel to a lot of those spots, Claudette and I. FCAP is a grassroots, now let me explain that, which is carried on by people like you every day. The office doesn't direct the ministry. We train, encourage, and identify and keep a purpose of what we are, and that's what the ministry is about. And really the ministry is carried on by people like you every day, all right? There's just some pictures of things. FCAP training comes from many years of experience in working with Christians in their workplace. As we saw people relate God and His Word to their work life, we began to see why some of them were shining lights. And I want to stop here and just say, this is something that for over 22 years now, just the opportunity of traveling, I saw people in the workplace that were a very sharp influence for the Lord. And I saw other Christians that had no clue. I mean, they just kind of went to work and then left. I actually sat across from a man who actually came up for vice president of all maintenance for Delta Airlines. He wasn't at the time, but he was a high-up supervisor, and he heard me speak on the workplace 18 years ago, and he sat across from me and he said, Paul, I'm involved in my church, I'm involved in missions, I have a great family, but I have no idea of God in work. I go to work and just do my work. So we talked, and I watched how God worked in Ed's life. We also saw others that it didn't matter, and yet others who struggled spiritually as the problems of work seemed to paralyze their faith. And we're going to talk about that in the third session. All right? How do we respond to the conditions going on around? How do they affect us? How can we be salt and light that we were made to be as Christians, okay? What is FCAP workplace training? And I want this clear because FCAP workplace training is not a motivational speech on how to improve your professional skills. There's a lot of Christians who will write on, they'll take professional tactics that often are taught generally to everyone, whether you're a Christian or not, and they'll kind of spiritualize them some. FCAP is not a motivational on professional skills, though I think that's very important, and I think that has a place. Really, it's about sharpening your spiritual skills at work, which will affect and also enhance how you perform your job. I tell you what, you take a Christian and put them in the workplace, and they're bothered by work. They don't like the company decisions. And they won't have a very effective life because they'll let all the problems affect them personally. So this is about, or maybe a Christian that doesn't know what to do there. Maybe they just don't have a lot of training and skills that they want to know more about. Well, we're going to talk all about our spiritual skills and how do our spiritual skills enhance our professional skills. All right? Your airline or your company taught you, or your schooling taught you professional skills. But you know, God has a lot to say about our spiritual skills and as applied to the workplace. So this is what it is about. As Christians, your spiritual and professional skills should not conflict. They work hand in hand, and your relationship to God brings another dimension to work. All right, let me just stop and say this. If you have a question or if you don't understand something, you need to raise your hand and say, clarify this, okay? That's the ground rules here, okay? Let's just start there. So any questions, say, I have a question, please feel free to raise your hand and ask a question. I'm gonna ask you some questions in just a minute, all right? Here's what I've done. In my 20 years of working with Christians around the world, or over 20 years, I was encouraged by many and ultimately by the Lord to put all that I've learned and we've worked with in a book. And so what we did do that, and I brought these books, and I think Bjorn was going to say something about them later, and I'll let him do all this. I printed a book 2 years ago called When God Shows Up to Work. And it's really biblical principles, a lot of real life stories, and a lot of just practical stuff of how do you operate in the workplace. Okay, here you go. Thank you, Bjorn.
There's even evolution already.
Yeah. He said, you need to show them the evolution. This is the first book. I just printed wondering what would happen about it. And then we had a graphic art designer give a nice tweak to it. And also we put discussion questions. I had several Christian leaders and people say, Paul, put discussion questions in the book, okay? Because it'll enhance them to talk in groups more about it. So each chapter has discussion questions and will relate to it. So this is kind of the handbook or the textbook for the material, but I'm going to give you an overview of that, and I'm going to explain in just a minute. But this is the expanded version of it. There was an interest in Switzerland, some business people to have it printed in German. We just had a reception the other night. We met these people from the first time. I haven't even met them. But they've heard me speak about the workplace, and several of them said, we'd like to print your book in German, and we'll pay for all the professional translation, layout, and all that. I was a little overwhelmed. It was all I could do just to get this book, and then when my brother-in-law said we'd like to print it in German, I thought to myself, I couldn't even think of it, but I thought, Lord, if it's your doing, you'll do it. I don't have to worry about it. And so the Lord did that, and we just printed these they just were printed 4 or 5 weeks ago, the German version. I have some here you can buy, and I'll sell them cheap. I'm not interested in making money just to cover the bill. I'm interested in getting the materials out, but I'll have those available for you. So that was my experience, so I put that down in a book just to give you more of an expanded view of what it is. But we're going to cover a lot of that today. What I saw from my experience of working with people is 4 basic characteristics. And I didn't sit in my office and think these out. I watched it. I saw it. And I began to realize some things. There were 4 characteristics I saw about Christians in the workplace who were spiritually effective in the workplace. That doesn't mean, and let me say something, Spiritually in influence in the workplace doesn't mean you don't have any problems. It doesn't mean you eliminate problems. Actually, if you're trained and you're prepared for that, God might give you more problems so He can show who He is through you. Okay? But what we notice is these 4 characteristics. And our training today are going to go through 4 sessions, and those 4 sessions are the 4 characteristics that what we saw of people that were influential in their workplace. Okay? The first one was their belief about work is God-sized in that they see the details of their job as important to God while believing the ultimate purpose and results are bigger than the company. Did you catch that? Yes. Read it again. Their belief about work is God-sized, meaning God sees importance, the details of what they do and how they do it and their attitude toward it. And the results, though, the ultimate purpose and the results are bigger than the company. Now that's a big view of work. Big view. That's the first thing we saw. Christians that went in there that were influential had a view of work bigger than their company. All right? I'll explain that. That's the first session. The next one is the view of ministry. Spiritually effective people at work, they don't see ministry as disrupting their job, but rather comes out in how they are an influence influence to their coworkers. It comes out naturally, okay? It's something that's natural there, all right? So ministry does not disrupt their job, but rather comes out in how they are an influence to their coworkers and in the situations at work. That's the second session we'll do today. The third thing is their view of adversity, and this was a big one, at work does not threaten their faith, but is seen as an opportunity to experience God's purposes and provisions to enhance them personally in their growth, but also to put God on display. That session, we did this in Charlotte about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and had a group about this size, mostly American Airlines people. And on this third session, they wanted to talk about a problem that they were all facing with the company because they just went through a merger with U.S. Airways and American Airlines. And you know what mergers do to people, don't you? They squeeze you and they put pressure on you. So they wanted to talk about it. So we talked about that. And then the last session is the idea of the church at work is more than just me reflecting and talking about what I learned on Sunday. But me actually being the church there, okay? It's proactive, okay? I identify and connect with other Christians in creative ways, just what some of these folks are doing already right here in Frankfurt, and maybe you do in your workplace, okay? So let's unpack each one of these, all right? How do you like that guy? He's got a lot. He looks like a real, I don't think he would qualify for overhead compartments as a passenger, all right? But here he comes off, so let's each unpack, and we're going to do the first session, all right? So if you open your notes there in the first session, we're going to look at God-sized view of work. Here you go. The first characteristic, spiritually effective people in the workplace have a belief about their work that is God-sized. We just did this, but I'll say it again. They see the details of their job as important to God, while at the same time believe the ultimate purpose and results are bigger than the company. Do you catch that? Do you understand that? That means you're still responsible to do your job, and we'll explain a little bit in detail. But they go with a view that all what's happening means more and has a bigger purpose than the company goals. All right? So it's clear in that. Let's unpack and look at that. All right? Session 1, we're going to look at the big picture. We're going to look at where work originated. All right? I find that sometimes Christians, I'll ask them a question, where did work come from? And they'll say, well, my company created the job. Well, no, he didn't. Your company did not create the job, okay? All right? In God's perspective on work, from his own words, what he says. All right, here you go, question. Just tell me something, reflecting, and we'll have fun for a minute. What did you see in your home when you were a young child? What was reflected in your home as a young child about work? What did you see work was like through your parents? What did they tell you about work? What were your impressions about work? Anyone?
Duty.
What?
Duty.
Oh, a duty. All right. What else? Anyone else? What did you feel your parents showed you about work? Duty?
To perform?
Pardon?
Performance.
Yep. All right. Performance?
I can obey also.
Okay. Obedience? You had?
Obedience.
Yeah. All right. You just didn't go to work and do your own thing.
Earning money.
Pardon?
Earning money.
Okay. Thank you very much. Earning money. I had a good friend of mine, he went to an interview for Alaskan Airlines this is probably 20 years ago when he first went in, and they said, what is your main reason why you want to become a pilot with Alaskan Airlines? And he said, well, honestly, the money is great. Afterward, the people said, you know what, thank you for being so open about that. Most people there think that, but they never say that. So, all right, anything else that you saw?
It's a burden.
A burden, okay. I've heard that.
Discipline.
Discipline, all right. Those are things you saw. All right, maybe it was I'll back up here to burden. Maybe you saw your parents working hard, long hours. I mean, our previous generations, they were hard, long workers, okay? All right, let's answer another question. If a coworker comes to you knowing you're a Christian and he asks you how your definition and understanding of work differs from the company's definition and understanding of work, what would you tell them? So what's the difference between your view as a Christian of work and the company's? What would you tell them? All right. Don't worry, I get the looks from this question at first and people think about it, yeah.
Well, I tell people, Lufthansa is so great. Every month they give me this money for my ministry work.
Yeah.
Such a good support. You know, I don't have to worry about who will donate for me. My company donates my ministry. It's
Okay.
awesome.
All right, very good. That's how it is. The company is supporting me. All right. What else? Anything else? How would you, if they came to you and said, okay, your group, define exactly what your understanding about work is as Christians compared to ours. Is there a difference?
I think it comes, just from the outside, on an everyday basis, I think it's basically the same. But then if it comes to values, I think from how you are as a Christian, you differentiate very much because you have a value system which goes above everyone else's. And so if they start to lie, you don't. And so that's quite a difference. And I always say when people try to, to pursue me to go in the wrong direction, and they kind of go do this with a twinkle eye, come on, I mean, everybody does it. I basically say to them, you know what, my big boss is watching me all the time. And they know exactly what I mean.
Yep, sure. All right, good. So there is a difference between our perception of things like values and how they're applied. There's things just to what things that we see that are important. We see that why we do things that maybe others won't. Okay. All right. That's very good. Anything else? Anything else? All right. Let's move on here. Let's look at the big picture. Here's the big picture. And the big picture is you will spend approximately 90,000 hours of your time on the job by the time you retire. 90,000 hours. At the same time, if you went to church regularly for that time, when you retire, you'll have spent approximately 5,000 hours in church. Okay? So the comparison is 5,000 hours in church if you go to church regularly and 90,000 hours in the workplace. I had an American Airlines pilot tell me, you know what that translates out to? He said, we were all figuring it out, Paul. 37% of your life awake is in the workplace. So look, let's just say the last 20 years of your life, or 30 years of your life, actually they were 20 because you slept 10 years because you sleep 8 hours out of 24 hours, okay? So now let's look at the the rest of that time, 37% of that is in the workplace. I mean, that's a big chunk of time, all right? That means for every 1 hour you spend in church, you will spend 18 hours in the workplace, all right? So, you know what? With all the difficulties at work and the chaos at work, Christians often find it hard to believe or to see and understand God's purposes, all right? They have a very difficult time of that. If you ask them, tell me how do you see God's presence working in your workplace? FCAP has a purpose statement. One of the two, it's a twofold purpose. We walk with Jesus Christ while on the job, possessing his presence and his power in order to be salt and light on the job. So I would ask Christians the first few years I came into FCAP, I would say, tell me, how do you see God's presence at work? People would stop and look at me and say, well, I don't know if I see God's presence at work. I don't see God's presence here. I said, really? All right. So how do you see God's power working through you at work? And I realized something. If they don't believe God's actively present there, they're not going to be thinking about how they can have power from God there. That works together. Now we're going to look at that in a minute. You see, with all the difficulties in the workplace, Christians often just say, you know what, I don't see God's purpose and presence there. And of course that really challenges them. And they often don't think much about God there. But you know, the truth is, really, if you think about your favorite Bible character for a moment, give me one of your favorite Bible characters.
Daniel.
What?
Daniel.
Daniel. Oh, he had an easy life, didn't he?
Wow.
He sat up there in the palaces of Nebuchadnezzar and wrote his book of Daniel. He didn't have an easy life. He didn't have an easy life at all. He had a difficult. And God put him right out in the world among the highest political system in the world. He put him in that. For what reason? To show his presence and his power through his life. And you eventually see Nebuchadnezzar bow down to God toward the end of his life. Isn't that interesting? And another character in the Bible? What?
David.
David. Wow. We know David didn't have he wrote all these Psalms. He didn't write them in his palaces. He wrote them literally running at times from his enemies. Look, you get the picture? God wants to use us. His presence and purposes just aren't in comfortable places where we sit on Sunday. His presence and purposes is to show who he is in our life, okay? To show us who he is in our life and to show himself through our lives to people around us. That means in our situation. And I got good news for you. The workplace has plenty of opportunities for you to do that. With it, because it has difficulties and it has challenges. All right? The origin of work. Where did work come from? Where did it originate from? Tell me. Where did work start? Well, we got to start here.
Creating the world.
All right. Okay. All right. It wasn't your company that gave you a job. All right. I hope you probably know more than that. It didn't start there. Actually, in Genesis 1, what do we find? We find God working, and God is enjoying his work. All right? So you see God carrying on work. Genesis 1, God created this, God created that. Oh, and he said it was good. God created this. It was good. All right? All right? And then what happened to change it? All right? We're going to come back to God creating that in just a minute. But he created this, and he created this partnership, okay? That's what he did. He said it's good. Then he created Adam and Eve, and he called him to enter a partnership to work with him. And we're going to look at more about that. But there's something that happened, and this is important, because we still have the effects of this. And what happened to work is that when humans reject God, they eventually distort his design of things. The idea of work changed under the Greek and Roman cultures. And I just want to give you a brief history. I'm not going to go long, but you should know this because we still feel the effects of this. All right? What happened is Homer came along, and here's what Homer said. Homer said that that work was a curse resulting from a punishment imposed on humanity. I mean, Homer, can you imagine? This was the great statesman of Greek, and probably you had to read Homer and Plato and Aristotle. We all had to read it in school. But he actually said work is basically a curse. In fact, The original word in the classical Greek for work was the root word for punishment. That's how much they saw work as punishment. Now, sometimes I ask Christians, do you believe work is punishment from God? And they say, yeah, it's punishment from God. I say, no, it's not punishment from God. We'll look at that. All right? Plato and Aristotle came along and they divided it into two stories. The upper story, what they said, well, okay, we'll make work a little bit better. One group of people do very important work. Politicians, of course, philosophers, okay, people who are in the arts, they're the important people. Everyone else that has to do a common job, their work isn't so important. It doesn't mean much to God. It doesn't mean much to society, not to God, to society. Remember, this was the view of work that was going on. All right? And then Cicero came 100 years before Jesus Christ, and literally Cicero saw that manual labor, just doing common labor, actually was unbecoming of free people. There's actually a quote here. Did I put this in? Oh yeah, no. Let me give you the quote here. Here's the quote from Cicero. He says, "Working daily for a livelihood was unbecoming of a gentleman, a free person, and vulgar are the means of livelihood of all hired workmen, whom we pay for mere manual labor." In other words, their work means nothing. It's kind of distasteful. This is what work was looked upon for most of the Greek and Roman cultures for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then all of a sudden on the scene in a small remote village named Nazareth during the first century, one came forth and claimed to be king and God. And what is he doing? What is he doing before he's baptized? What is he doing? He's working as a carpenter. You see, the culture looked at this and said, no one who could do such a menial job of manual labor could be worth anything to the culture. Now, this is the living God who left heaven and became a man and lived among us. Before he went into his public ministry, he's actually working manual labor as a carpenter. You see, this actually kind of cut across the culture. The culture couldn't understand this. They said, this man has no importance to us, nothing. Because he's working like just with his hands. Now, I put this verse right here. This is very interesting here, this verse, in Mark chapter 1 and verses 9 to 11. If you have your German Bibles, you can read it in that. Mark 1, 9 to 11. Someone want to read that in English? Give me a little break here. Someone want to read the passage? You can read it right up there, or you can read it in your German Bible. Go ahead. Someone read it out loud.
In German or in English?
German or
English.
English, does it matter? Please ask.
Go ahead.
German or English, does it matter?
Either one.
Either one.
In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in Jordan. Immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heaven opening and the Spirit like a dove descending upon him. And a voice came out of the heavens, "You are my beloved Son, in you I am well pleased."
Okay. All right. Very interesting here. Jesus is about to enter his public ministry, what he was going to do for 3 to 3.5 years. Unfortunately, I would be interested, I don't know how your German Bible reads, but this phrase right here, you're my beloved son, in the original Koine Greek, it has an interesting tense to it. It's called kind of a past historical. Here's literally what it says. "I have been well pleased with what you have done thus far." That's literally what the text is saying. It's just not so easy to translate. The Father from heaven, Jesus is about ready to become public about his ministry. And as this happens, the Father with a voice comes from heaven and says, "All that my Son has done thus far has pleased me." What had he done thus far? He had worked as a carpenter. That's very interesting. Often, do you think Christians reflect much on that part of Jesus' life? Do they ever think much of that? Have you ever thought much of that before? Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. You see, Christianity really started out almost as a working person's faith. You know, Jesus' followers were fishermen. They were tax collectors. They were people in everyday life. And even though some of them left their professions to follow him, the 12, there are others who kept their professions up and worked. You can read in the Acts. You can read in Romans 16. These are people, and they said, he was the treasurer of the town. She dealt in the business of purple materials. These are business people that are Christians. They didn't desert their work in order to leave everything. They saw that as a part of it. Oh yes, the disciples left, okay, because they followed him because they had a very special meeting. But I want you to know something, that God puts a high premium on work. He himself came and worked as a carpenter. Now, why would that be important for you and I to understand that when we go to work? Tell me, why would that be important? How would that help us? Why would that be important for us to understand that our work is important to God? Any thoughts?
We want to do a good job, that God is also well pleased with what we do and not only how much we talk about Jesus.
If we have to go to work and do something for God other than work, then I don't know if we understand God's view of work. Okay? All right? And that's what we're going to look at a little bit more. Very important. Very, very important. All right? We're going to come back to this. All right? Then something happened. All right? Christianity's influence on the idea of work. All right? His followers were working people of that day. Christians viewed their work as honorable and pleasing to God, which gave dignity to the details of their work. When I did this book, I researched in the library on the history of Christianity. And I looked as much as I could. I went 30, 40, 50 books I went through on the history. And what I found out was this: I wrote a statement in there after I do, the second chapter is on the history of work. And I wrote a statement that I believe outside their church meeting, when they gathered, outside their meetings, the most influential place where Christians influenced the culture in the first 2 centuries was in their workplace. Probably. A lot of them were slaves. A lot of them lived in homes of their master. The influence that they had on society, you can see the impact they had on it. So it was a place probably where they expressed and practiced their faith, how it was a part of their work, how it showed in their work, how God showed up through the way they did their work. All right? Very important. All right? And the origin of work changed, though. And this is interesting. And this is what I want you to know, because this still affects us. All right? The institutional church kind of devalued the view of work by creating 2 stories. What happened in 313, Constantine made Christianity the state religion. Here's how it went. So the church now became more politically involved in politics of the culture. And as the church became more involved, they became more powerful, and their leaders became more powerful. And as their leaders became more powerful, they put a very, very high premium. They put a very, very high, their positions were very spiritual. They were really God's workers. So here's what the church said. Those people who do God's work, all right, they call it the upper story, they represent the important spiritual work of the church. Oh, these are these people that minister, all right? And then the lower story were the lesser secular work. This was dominant for hundreds of years. You know, the people who do the common work, they just go to work, all right? All right, and the lower story is the lesser secular work. This was dominant for hundreds of years and still affects us today. And I'm going to read 2 quotes to you, all right? But here's how it went. Here's how it goes. Well, just like this. You know, I just go do a job, and then and I do my job, and then I go leave and I serve God elsewhere. Well, let me just ask you a question, and you answer this. If you went to another Christian in your workplace and you asked them, do you think your work is as important as your pastor on Sunday? What do you think most Christians would say?
Can you repeat the question, please?
If you went to another Christian in your workplace and you asked them, do you think your work is as important as your pastor who ministered to you on Sunday? What would you tell? What do you think most Christians would say?
No, they would say no. Yeah, most say no.
Sure. Doesn't, no, not no way. My pastor preaches. Well, I want you to read something here. All right? Comes from your country. Comes from a guy that I've read a lot of his theology and stuff. I don't agree with everything, but I like a lot what he said. Here's what Martin Luther said, the German reformer. The work of monks and priests in God's sight are in no way whatsoever superior to the work of a farmer laboring in a field or a woman working her home.
That is if it's the German field, right?
I like it. That's good. That's pretty good. Okay, here you go. Here's what Luther was saying. Why is it that we made work, these guys that stand in the church, as they're spiritual, and someone who works in the field is not spiritual and doesn't mean anything to God? You see, God says it's all spiritual. He makes no division. He makes no division with that. He says that's all important to him. Whatever you do wholeheartedly as unto the Lord. All right? That's what he says. So, very, very important. And then William Tyndale came along. He was the English reformer of which what we have, our English Bible. Here's what Tyndale said. Okay, if you look externally on the outside, all right, there's a difference between washing dishes and preaching the Word of God. But as to what pleases God more, there's no difference at all. They both please God. That's what he's saying. They both are something that's pleasing to God. All right? Look, your work is important to God. And what I saw is some Christians had a very poor view of work, or they saw their work no different than anyone else around them. They're not going to see God's presence and power the way they should. Because their work, they don't think it means much to God. Or what they do is they ignore doing their work, and they just say, well, I'll do something else for God here and carry on my time. Well, God's going to give you opportunities. We'll come back to that. Don't worry about that. You had your hand up. You were going to say?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on that because I basically would like to ask you your view on the nowadays because these guys from Martin Luther was 500 years ago. So I think from my perception, even though I totally agree and I totally disagree with separating that there are the holy ones and then there are not the holy ones because they're not working full time.
Right.
But my personal observation is that the church leaders are basically still up today promoting that statement that what they are doing is more valuable, and how they celebrate themselves within the church is basically, you observe that all the time.
Yeah.
Can I check something real quick? I fully agree with you. Real quick, we were at Mission Net just a couple of days ago.
A week ago.
And there was a young man very passionate for Christ and excited and getting ready for the mission field. And we were sharing the book with him, and he said, oh, really, this book is not meant for me, because I'm going as a missionary, and I'm not in a workplace. But it was so interesting to see the reaction. And so I said, who will you be a missionary to? He said, well, whatever country I go to. And I said, what do you think they will be involved in? Oh, the workplace. And I said, the temptation will be that they will look at you and they say, oh, this is a missionary. He's doing God's work. Full time. I said, but now you have the opportunity to let them know that their work is just as important as your work. And he said, I think I need the book. But you're right. That perception is still around.
Yeah. It's a problem. And as I said just a minute ago, we're still feeling the effects of that.
Do you confront pastors?
I went through theological school, but I've worked the last 23 years.
No, but the question was, do you talk to pastors about this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very much. And you know what? I'm seeing a change, a shift. You know what I tell pastors? Look, you know what I tell them? I say, how much time do you spend at teaching your people about being a good husband, a good wife, and raising your kids? And they say, oh, we spend a big time in that. How much time do you teach them about how to deal with their problems and how to be a witness and how to be a light in the workplace? Don't hardly end at all. Well, next to the family, the workplace takes probably equal amount of time. So we're not saying anything. I don't think we can fulfill our mission out in the world if we neglect helping people think through how they can be effective in their workplace.
But the problem is that most pastors, they finished school, then they went to the theological seminary, they have never been in the workplace. So they don't know the challenges, they don't know how exhausted their church members are and how they can be sought and light because they have never tried themselves. So it's more or less like empty words when they speak. I think you have no idea what it means to work in the hospital or wherever. You know.
But I want to say we're seeing a change with that because a lot of them are recognizing, hey, I mean, these people that are around us, they spend it there. There's a ministry called Peacemakers Ministry in America, and the former vice president was a corporate lawyer for 28 years in Denver, Colorado. And he read my book and he said, I love it, Paul. I think I want to get this in some of the pastors that I know, their hands. He suggested the questions, discussion questions, which we were already using. But he said this, he said, I went to a big church in Denver, loved the church, involved in it, great Bible teaching, great worship, everything. 28 years I went there. I was close friends with the pastor. In 28 years, he only asked me 2 times about my challenges in the workplace. Twice. In 28 years. I'm not saying they need to ask you all the time, but obviously it needs to be addressed because people come up to me and they say, you know what, I don't know what to do. We sat next to a couple, German guy, we didn't know if they were married at MissionsNet. The last dinner we had, this young guy and this gal, this is a neat story, this was, and I didn't know if they were married, they were getting married. And they're praying about missions work, and I just ended up talking to him, and come to find out he's an engineer, designer for Airbus. So it was kind of neat with us in our industry. So I said, great, and I just told him a little bit about FCAP and about what we emphasize, and I gave him a book and told him what it was about. And he looked at me and he said, 2 weeks ago I asked God, God, is my work of any value to you? Please show me how you want to use me in my work environment. And he said, and you come here and sit next to me. So I thought, wow, I mean, that's encouraging to us. Look, it is a need. It is a need. You know, we tell people like you, go back to your pastors and say, hey, I'm a viable missionary that, like I'll use I'm a viable missionary. Bjorn could say, I'm a viable, a real live missionary, and my company pays my salary, okay, to be a full Christian there. Now, they're going to benefit from that, okay? I don't mean you go preach and use company time and ignore your job. We're going to see that in a second. But it is a need. Yeah, it is. So I want to encourage you to encourage your pastors. Go to them and say, please, I need you to start praying for me, because I go to a place where your pastors will never reach those people. They'll never reach people like that. We were at the Indian Convention in 2009. Four former Hindus stood up and testified there. I would have never, ever even gone to a Christian church, but I worked next to a Christian in Air India, and I saw Christianity through them. That's you. That's your workplace. You're bringing people, you're introducing people to Christ and showing who He is. Bjorn.
And I really want to encourage that before we, was das überzeugen noch? Before we convince our pastors to convince us first. To convince us first. Then our preaching to them is better, our convincing. And if we wait for our pastors to teach it so that we do it, then we are still waiting and not doing it. For me, it was a big thing before I changed my actions at work to change my identity. Because when I think, wow, I'm a minister here, a missionary here, I'm the light and the salt. Then, without thinking, because my identity has changed, my actions will change without thinking. Yeah. Before, if I was thinking sometimes, oh, today I was really not the light for Jesus. I didn't shine. but then I say something which the Bible doesn't speak about me. The Bible says you are light and salt.
Yeah.
It's a done thing. If I reject it, I'm not aligned with God's truth,
Yeah.
and my identity and my actions will not be there.
Yeah.
But then I didn't start with saying, I'm the biggest spotlight here. I just changed first, okay, I'm stop saying this. I say sometimes I'm a small light, and sometimes I'm a big light,
Yep.
but I'm always a light.
Yep, that's right.
Of course, I
Good.
want to grow in that too, but even that changed.
Yeah.
Help is already so much in everyday life.
All right, that's well put. Got to start with us first. That's what he's saying. You've got to see it yourself first, okay? That's what this training by God's grace we pray to do. Starts with me. Starts with me first, all right? Now, let's just look for a minute at a few things. We're going to go through this. We're going to go about 22 minutes and run through this. Then we're going to take a break, all right? First of all, God's perspective on work. I'm going to give you 5 things about God's perspective which I consider foundational, all right? 5 things. First of all, work is ordained and designed by God, all right? All right, first of all, it's ordained and designed by God. It's not a curse or almost one. It's a partnership with God as we exercise dominion over creation. Now, what does it mean to have dominion over creation? Because that needs to be clarified, all right? What did it mean for Adam and Eve? All right? All right?
Responsibility.
All right, responsibility. And what did they have to, what was their responsibilities? All right? They had to do soil, they had to plant seeds. You can see, you know, we're still exercising dominion. Do you realize humans have actually taken God's laws and resources and they fly these pieces of metal up in the sky that weigh 45,000 pounds, or probably more than that, 150,000 pounds, and they're flying up in the sky because they exercise dominion. They create medicine, they create schools, they create things dominion, all right? But God's dominion also means His rule in your life, okay? That people see God, all right? I want to take both of that, all right? So when you're in the workplace, God wants you to have dominion, all right, over creation, all right? That doesn't mean that you're in control of all what happens. What that means is what all that's going on doesn't control you. God does. Kind of just what you just said. God's the one that controls me, not all the circumstances. I have to realize I'm there. I'm His. All right? The verse, out of the ground, you can read that. God calls it every tree to grow, pleasing in His sight, that's good for food, the tree of life. He went and He gave them the resources, and He took those resources and He developed them. We're still doing that. I mean, what humans are doing even now, creatively, with foods and stuff, the way we do it, it's fascinating. But you know, they couldn't do it if God didn't give them the resources to do it. They can't invent the basic resources. They can invent a lot of stuff. All right? We went to, if you've ever heard about George Washington Carver, he's the black man that lived right after the Civil War, and he did 300 things with a peanut. I don't know if you've read the story. It's an incredible story. By the way, he was a Christian. He actually led the Bible study at Tuskegee Institute. We went to there about 2-3 months ago, Claudette and I wanted to see this because I read his biography. But do you know that Carver actually created synthetics in the late 1800s before they ever were produced? From the shell of the peanut, he created cures, and he stood before the Congress of the United States in probably 1920, and they asked him, how is it that you could do so much with a peanut? And he said, I just asked the creator of the peanut, Lord, what can you do from it? And as a scientist, I just researched it, and I asked God to give me wisdom. That's dominion. But also dominion means spiritually, all right? That's important, okay? Psalms, He causes the grass to grow and the cattle, I would say that. So really, this is important here. The first and foremost is that work is ordained by God. It's not a curse. All right? I've actually had Christians say, well, yeah, God gave us work to kind of punish us. Oh, that's the Greek view. I said, you're holding the Greek-Roman view. That's not a Christian view. Why is that not true? There's something wrong. Why is that not true? All right? Or how does the effects of the fall, our falling from God, how does it affect our work? Maybe I should ask that. How is our work affected from that?
Tiring.
All right? It's tiring. Sweat of the brow. All right? What else? All right? We feel thorns and thistles. There's resistance. We feel that. You see, Adam and Eve was given the call to work before they fell from God. So work was not something. So sin doesn't destroy work and God's purpose of the work. It just makes it more difficult. And so we feel worn out. We get worn out. We feel resistance. If you work with the public, your passengers can be thorny. Your coworkers, you can feel like they're like thorns and thistles on you. That's the effect of the fall, okay? So that's important, all right? Next, and this is good. First, let's read, 2 passages. I want us to read this. Let's read this. Someone want to read this for me in English? You can do that, or you can look in your German Bible. Someone read that, you can read it right from the screen.
Bond servants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ, not by the way of eye service, as people pleasers, but as bond servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not to man.
Okay. And next, the Colossians passage. Similar passage, all right? Someone want to read that?
Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ.
Okay. Next, second point. This is as equally important as the first. Work was designed and ordained by God, not your company. He's the one that created it. All right? Your relationship to Him is important to see that it means something to God. It's not something that's secular. It's something that's very spiritual and important to Him. Next is, for Christians, their work is done first and foremost as unto the Lord, not merely unto humans. That's what the passage said. It's not Christ. You're not serving. I think the passage before this said, you render a service of good as unto the Lord, not unto men. It's talking about your work. All right? And here we go right here in the Colossians passage. You're serving the Lord Christ. All right? So your work is if it's important to God, and this is what I saw, you're going to see what you do is important first and foremost as to God first, not just your company. All right? And that is a very, very important. And there's some things he mentions here as our obedience. We're to be obedience, okay? That means that we're seen as voluntary. You don't need the company to come to you and say, oh, by the way, if we give you more money, will you work better? That's not voluntary obedience. That's meaning you need something on the outside to give you a reason to work wholeheartedly. God says, no. As Christians, your first responsibility is to work wholeheartedly without incentives. And most of these people whom he was talking to were slaves. They didn't have a lot of outward incentives. They were motivated from within the heart. Next, he says, in your notes there, he said, done with sincerity of heart. Our motivation is, and I think I have this right here, yeah. Our motivation, sincerity of heart, our motivation is entirely different. We're motivated, really, and we're compelled by the Lord. All right? It's our sincerity of what we have. Without hypocrisy, we're not eye service. We're not saying, oh, I'll do a good job when they're watching me so I can be a good witness for the Lord. No. When they're not watching you, God wants you to do your work as unto Him first and foremost wholeheartedly. Wow, that's important. And you're not doing it to please them. You're doing it because your work is something that God is a part of, and you're a part of what He's doing. I went to a Christmas luncheon probably 18 years ago and sat at a table. It was an FCAP luncheon, 750 people there. I'm sitting at a head table. The lady that organized it said, I'm going to sit you at the head table. They wanted me to come and say something about FCAP. At the head table was a vice president of maintenance, the CEO of the airline, Northwest Airlines, and two more vice presidents, one more vice president in flight. Well, they just came. I didn't know them, and I was talking with them and engaging with them. I really enjoyed it. It was a very good opportunity for me. And they asked me to come up and speak, and I went up to the platform and sat down, and I talked to everyone, 750 people, most of it were airlines people, workplace people. And at the end of my little speech, I looked down and said, Mr. Dasberg, he was the CEO of Northwest Airlines, and I said, Mr. Dasberg, I make no apology. I don't apologize for telling Christians to work first and foremost to the Lord, not Northwest Airlines. If they do, there'll be a benefit to the airline. I came around, sat down. John Dasberg leaned over between me and this vice president right here and said, Mr. Curtas, I came here today because what you said at the end, I'm here today because I've seen just what you said in these people. I didn't even know if he was a Christian. But John Dasberg, the CEO of the airline, saw something that motivated these people in a way that the airline, the company, couldn't motivate them. And he saw it as something different. You see, if you go to work and your view of work is no different than the person next to you, I don't know if you're going to really be showing Christianity and Christ to people. I think you can maybe tell them about it, but I think you're not going to demonstrate it. Because when you go to work with the God side view of work, it'll affect you. Okay? It affects everything about you, the way you do things. Now, does that mean things are going to be easier? No, not necessarily. All right? And then next, and this is a good one here, okay? Let's read these passages. These are good passages. All right, someone want to read those passages? Maybe someone read 2:24 and then someone read 3:12 and 13. Go ahead.
There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen that it is from the hand of God.
All right.
I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is the gift of God.
All right. One more, 5:18 and 19. Someone read that.
Here's what I've seen to be good and fitting, to eat, to drink, and enjoy oneself in all one's labor, in which he toiled under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him. For this is his reward. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God.
Okay. Solomon, probably the wisest entrepreneur of his day. He pursued wealth, he pursued knowledge, he pursued pleasures, wisdom, pursued it all. And here was his conclusion. This was his conclusion. His conclusion was our enjoyment of work and seeing good in it is not based on money, salaries, retirement. Our enjoyment of it is based on a relationship with God, and He gives us the ability to enjoy it from His hand as a gift. Okay? As a gift. You see, the world is looking for something new and better in their job, and they're thinking, if I get this and I have this, I'm going to feel better. Well, it's never enough. They want something more later. Solomon's saying is this: our enjoyment of work comes, we can take pleasure in our work knowing that the enjoyment of it, the fulfillment of it, the results of it come as a gift from the hand of God. All right? And you will see God do some great, great things. You see, what's here associated with enjoyment is really an understanding, this is important, understanding that there's a greater work going on in our work. When we understand that there's a greater work going on than me just doing my job, but it's tied into doing my job, when we understand that, that's liberating. That's saying, hey, God's got something going on here today, even though I don't see it, God's got something happening. And that's important. Very, very important. All right? So look, God wants you and I to enjoy that. We just don't need to say, well, if I do the company goals and leave, I'll be happy. No. God is carrying on a work in addition to your job description and what you're doing for Him. All right? I worked with a guy that he did carpentry. He had an educated guy, but he wanted to do carpentry work. His father was the executive vice president of Coca-Cola. He had his own Learjet when he was vice president of Coca-Cola. He had a house in Atlanta, a house on the coast of California, and a house in Hawaii. His dad came to work. I was just helping Tom, and Tom said, hey, my dad's coming. He doesn't know God, but he's coming to help today. He just retired from Coca-Cola as vice president, executive vice president. I thought, great. So I'm here working with Tom's dad, swinging the hammer on helping Tom at his house. And so I said, hey, Mr. Adams, I said, hey, how are things going for you? And how's life? How are you enjoying retirement? And he said, well, yeah, retirement's good. But he said, Paul, I have no peace and satisfaction in my life. I thought to myself, most men and women are working to get what Mr. Adams has. He'd got it all, and it hasn't delivered. He doesn't. He hasn't. He's not there. Doesn't have it. Something missing in his life. See, God wants us. He's the one that gives us the ability to enjoy it. All right. It's a gift. All right. The enjoyment we receive comes from only as a gift from the hand of God. All right. He mentions these things right here. From His hand, all right? Seeing good in all of our labor is a gift, all right? These verses all bring that out, all right? Just two more things, and then we'll take a break. The ultimate reward of work. This is good. The ultimate reward of work and wages that we do, the ultimate reward of it is this, that someday we are going to receive a reward in the inheritance, all right? That our work, all right, the ultimate reward is just not based on our wages that we earn, on our retirement that we gain or benefits. Rather, it's an eternal reward that we'll get in the inheritance someday. The Colossians passage said that. An eternal reward that we will receive someday based on how and why we did our work. No matter if you were an airport sweeper, like I remember we saw come to the FCAP convention, there were probably very poor people in Hyderabad, India, or whether you were a pilot with the airlines or executive in a company, it didn't matter your position. Someday when you get to heaven, God's going to say, I have a reward for you based on how and why you did your work, not your position. You know, I've studied a lot of the Bible. I heard rewards about the incorruptible reward, the martyr's reward and crown, but I never heard anyone tell me that, you know, there's actually a reward someday that we'll get based on how and why we did our work in this life. And it has nothing to do with our position. God's going to reward us someday for it. And then ultimately, this is another thing, that the wages and benefits that we receive now should be seen as a means of blessing others. So in a temporary way, God's actually given you a job so you can actually bless others. There's a beautiful passage. I don't know, did I write this down? No, okay, the passage there is the Acts. You can write it down, Acts 20, where it was actually Luke was recording words, and it said that Jesus used to say. It's interesting, the quote that Luke records in Acts is not in the Gospels, but evidently it was something known that Jesus was known to say, it's better to give than receive. All right, and it's actually in the context of work. Paul is actually making the quote, all right, and saying it. So look, your work is used to blessing others. Your responsibility to take care of your family, your responsibility to bless God's work and what's going on. I don't mean just your church, I mean God's work in many ways. It's a blessing. All right, God wants us to enjoy that and have that. All right, just real quick. So what do we teach our children, the importance? Well, how will we help them understand the reward of work, lest they just think it's money? And who has kids here? How many have kids? All right. So what can you teach your children? How can you teach your children the importance of what the reward they can gain from work other than just a paycheck? You do that? I'm always interested in getting ideas with kids. Yes?
They can tell, but it's just a try. Doesn't work. I just always tell them, because sometimes I said, if you do those works, okay, you get some pocket money for it.
Yeah.
But I said, I really like to see that you like to do the work and to enjoy your father. Because if you do it with the motivation, yes, I do it because I like to do it because my father told me to do so.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I said, I'm happy if you see you working not with a sad face, but with a happy face.
Okay.
To have the privilege to do it.
All right. Very good. You can see Godfrey saying the relationship between the father and son, that they do it out of joy, because to please Dad.
Yeah.
All right. All right. That's good. Anything else? What about voluntary work? That we teach our children, teach the next generation voluntary work? I think it's important. My father had us volunteer for things when we were young. And I remember we would go help put a roof on somewhere or something. It was a good thing, you know. It wasn't just paid, but it was something that I realized I was giving, especially even more so. So there's some ideas you can bring in, and I would encourage you who have children, you're actually modeling, you're actually showing them about the workplace through your life, all right? Lastly, this is the last thing here, in God's perspective. Working with a God-sized view of work makes the belief in God attractive to others, okay? Someone read this and we'll be done here. Someone read that, we'll take a break here. Someone read that.
Bond servants are to be submissive to their own masters in everything. They are to be well-pleasing, not argumentative, not pilfering, but showing all good faith, so that in everything they may adorn the doctrine of God our Savior.
Okay. A very interesting verse. The word right there, the word well-pleasing, not honoring, bond servant, submissive, showing all good faith, making everything they may adorn the doctrine of God. Look, the word adorn in the original language was the same word we get for cosmetic, cosmeto. It's when, you ladies know this better than us men, you can make yourself more presentable. Sometimes our hair's sticking straight up. But the idea there is when you do your work in such a way, all right, you're not cheating, you're not argumentative, you're doing your work as unto the Lord, what you'll say will be attractive because of what you do. There's nothing worse, and we say it in FCAP, if you don't walk the walk, don't talk the talk. All right? There's nothing worse than having someone who does a poor job, doesn't care giving details when they're supposed to, and then they talk about God. You see, according to this verse, what they say isn't attractive. What you do on the job and how your attitude, the way you do your work, the way you present yourself, it's going to make God attractive.
Could you please repeat that sentence? If you don't walk the walk.
If you don't walk the walk, don't talk the talk. Okay, that was I heard that. I heard that before I was ever even with FCAP. They used to say that at their meetings. If you don't walkie the walkie, don't talkie the talkie. That's the way they would say it. All right, because it's not going to make God attractive. So, but on the other hand, God, look. I think you said it, sister, back there earlier, our values, the things that are important to us, when we show that in our relationship with God in the way we do our work, oh my, people take note of it. All of a sudden they're asking, starting to ask questions. Why is this going on? What is it, why are you doing this? All right? I want to just close with this little story. A couple of months ago, we had a meeting in Atlanta, and a guy named Chris came up to this meeting, and he said, I'm an engineer at the airline, and I work around all these engineers in the department with the airline. They do design stuff or something, I can't remember, maybe with systems or whatever. And so he said, my workplace is an extremely impersonal workplace. I mean, no one even says anything. You walk in there and they're cold, everyone's cold to one another. And I've been praying, Lord, what do you want me to do in order to bring something in there that's different? I don't mean go in there and start preaching to people. What do you want me to start at to show them? So actually, someone gave him my book and he read it and he said, you inspired me to think about some creative ways to do it. So I started praying. So he said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in every morning and start greeting people. Not everyone, but I'll go up and say, hey, Bjorn, how are you doing? Good to see you. How was your weekend? Hope you had a good weekend. And he went to people and he said at first they were like this. He said, but I thought, I'm not going to let that discourage me. No one says a word. They're not even nice to one another. They're not even, bad to one another, nothing. So he kept doing this for a couple weeks, and he didn't do it like pushing it on them, but he did it just naturally. 2 weeks later, 2 people come up to him and said, hey, why are you doing this? And he said, I just think I want to be more cordial and nice to us here. And he said, because I feel that way myself, and I also have some beliefs that make me feel that way. I said, really? Okay, all right, okay. 2 weeks later, a couple more people came up to him, he said. He said, shortly after that, 2 of the people said, tell us more about why, explain more why you feel you want to do that. He told them, look, I have a relationship with a personal God, and he's kind to me, and he's gracious to me. And he lets me talk to him when I need to talk to him. And he's been kind to me. So I want to show that the best I can here. He said, 2 of the people now he meets with, and they want to know more about spiritual things and about God. You see, the way we do our work and the way we conduct ourselves, the way we see work is important, and we bring that to work, it's going to catch people's attention. They're going to say, there's something different. You see, it's just not our presence being there is enough. Really, what we need to do is show how our relationship to God is kind of woven all into the way we do our work in a very natural way. That's what God wants to do. All right, let's take a break. Brother?
Yeah, let me just give you